The wrench slipped from Daniel Reed's hand and clattered against the metal floor of the maintenance tunnel. He lay on his back beneath a coolant pipe that had been leaking for 3 days, his arms aching from holding them above his head. The pipe was too narrow for most species on the station, which meant the human got the job. It always worked that way. Through the open panel above him, he could hear voices in the corridor. Hectarian voices, their clicks and chirps translated through his earpiece. "Did you see the human in Bay 6 yesterday? Struggled to lift a single cargo container. Pathetic, soft species. No exoskeleton, no natural armor. I don't understand why the Coalition even accepted them." Daniel kept working. He had heard worse in his 8 months on Harmony 7. The station was a diplomatic hub where dozens of alien species conducted trade and negotiations. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Coalition, and most aliens saw them as weak curiosities. Fragile, harmless. He finished sealing the pipe and pulled himself out of the tunnel. His uniform was covered in coolant residue, and his shoulders burned from the awkward position. Nobody thanked maintenance workers, especially not human ones. The corridor outside was busy with afternoon activity. A bulwark trader named Grant lumbered past, his 4 massive arms carrying equipment that would take 3 humans to lift. He was 8 feet tall and built like a boulder with fur. He didn't even glance at Daniel. A Vorian diplomat called Lissa walked by next, her reptilian scales gleaming under the station lights. Her species were warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their combat skills and tactical minds. She was having a conversation with another Vorian, speaking in their hissing language about treaty negotiations. Daniel headed toward the maintenance office to file his repair report. The office was near the security center, and as he passed by, he saw a crowd gathered around the main monitor. Tral, the Hectarian security chief, stood at the center. His 8-foot frame and armored exoskeleton made him look like a creature from Earth's ancient past, something that should be extinct. Another mining colony went silent, Tral was saying. His mandibles clicked with agitation. "That makes 4 in 3 weeks. Daniel slowed his pace, listening. "Any survivors?" Someone asked. "None. Same pattern as the others. The entire facility torn apart, everyone gone. No bodies recovered." A bulwark security officer crossed his massive arms. "What kind of predator does this?" "Unknown. Whatever it is moves fast and leaves no witnesses. 3 different species have lost outposts now. It's hunting in the asteroid fields between here and the outer markers." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard of attacks like this before long ago in classified briefings that most of the galaxy had forgotten. "We need to organize a hunting party," Lisa said, stepping forward. "Track this creature and eliminate it before more colonies fall." Tral's mandibles clicked in agreement. "I'm assembling a team. Vorian trackers, Hectarian warriors, bulwark enforcers. We'll find this predator." Daniel stepped into the security center. "I can help." The room went quiet. Every alien turned to look at him. Several of them made sounds that his translator interpreted as amusement. "You?" Grant said, his voice like grinding stones. "What could a human possibly contribute?" "I have tracking experience." You can barely lift standard equipment," Tral interrupted. "This is a matter for species with actual combat capabilities. No offense, human, but you'd be a liability." Lysa examined him with her cold reptilian eyes. "Your species has no natural weapons, no armor. You're slow by galactic standards and physically weak. This predator has killed trained warriors from 3 different species. What makes you think you'd survive?" Daniel met her gaze. "I've hunted dangerous things before." "On your soft little world?" Grant laughed, a rumbling sound. "I've seen the reports on Earth. Your largest predators are smaller than our children. You've never faced real danger." The other aliens made sounds of agreement. Daniel felt heat rise in his face, but he kept his expression neutral. There was no point in arguing. They had already decided what humans were capable of, and nothing he said would change their minds. "Dismissed, Reed," Tral said, turning back to his team. "Go fix your pipes and leave the hunting to species designed for it." Daniel left the security center. The aliens were already back to planning their expedition, discussing their superior tracking abilities and natural combat advantages. They had forgotten he existed the moment he walked out. He returned to his small quarters in the human section of the station. It was a tiny room with a sleeping pod, a storage locker, and a desk with a personal terminal. He sat down and pulled up the station's database, accessing the reports on the destroyed mining colonies. The more he read, the more certain he became. The pattern of destruction, the speed of the attacks, the complete lack of survivors. He had seen this before. Though the files from that time were sealed behind security clearances, these aliens didn't know existed. Daniel opened a separate screen and entered a code that took him past 3 security barriers. His hands moved quickly across the keyboard, accessing files that were supposed to be locked even to him. His military records. His real military records, not the sanitized version the Coalition had been given, Operation Nightfall. The reclamation zones. Sector classifications that made his current clearance look like public information. He found what he needed in a file marked with enough warnings to make most people close it immediately. There were only 3 known creatures in galactic record that hunted with this specific pattern. 2 of them were extinct. The third was supposed to be Void Stalker. Daniel sat back, his mind racing. If he was right, then every alien on that hunting team was already dead and they just didn't know it yet. Void Stalkers were apex predators from the dead sectors, creatures that evolved to hunt in the dark spaces between stars. They were intelligent, fast, and nearly impossible to kill with conventional weapons. The Coalition's warrior species would try to fight it with strength and natural advantages. That was their way. It was how they had always survived. But Daniel knew something they didn't. On Earth, humans weren't the strongest predators. They weren't the fastest or the most armored. They had survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more stubborn than anything that tried to kill them. He made his decision. That night, while the station slept in its simulated night cycle, Daniel went to the docking bay. He moved quietly through the corridors, avoiding security patrols. His military training made it easy. The aliens thought humans were clumsy and obvious, but that was because Daniel let them think that. He reached his assigned shuttle, a small maintenance vessel he used for external repairs. He loaded it with equipment from the storage lockers, working quickly and methodically. Magnetic nets, pressure sensors, cryo equipment, tools that the aliens would have dismissed as useless against a predator. The last thing he loaded was a sealed case from his personal locker. Inside were weapons that hadn't seen use in 5 years since he left Earth's reclamation forces. He had hoped he would never need them again. Daniel climbed into the pilot seat and began the launch sequence. The docking bay's automated systems processed his departure request without question. Maintenance shuttles came and went at all hours. As the shuttle cleared the station and accelerated toward the asteroid fields, Daniel allowed himself one moment of doubt. He was going to hunt a creature that had destroyed 3 military outposts and killed dozens of trained warriors. He was doing it alone with improvised equipment and nobody even knew he was gone. The aliens were right about one thing. By their standards, humans were weak, but Daniel had learned a long time ago that strength was relative. And sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The shuttle's navigation system locked onto the coordinates of the last destroyed colony. Daniel settled in for the 3-hour flight, his hands steady on the controls, his mind already planning the hunt. Behind him, Harmony 7 grew smaller in the viewport. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness of the asteroid field, something that had killed without mercy was waiting. Daniel wasn't worried about the creature. He was worried about what would happen when the creature realized it had become the prey. Asteroid K449 rotated slowly against the backdrop of distant stars. Its surface pocked with mining equipment and dead lights. Daniel brought his shuttle in low, scanning for signs of life. The sensors showed nothing, not even residual heat signatures. Whatever had come through here had been thorough. He docked at the main airlock and checked his equipment one final time before cycling through. The colony beyond was dark and silent. His helmet light cut through the blackness as he moved down the entry corridor, his boots magnetic against the floor in the low gravity. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Even through his suit's filters, he caught traces of it. Blood and chemicals and something else. Something his conscious mind didn't recognize but his hindbrain did. The smell of a predator's territory. The walls were scored with deep gouges, the metal peeled back like paper. Daniel ran his gloved hand along one of the marks. 4 parallel cuts, each one perfectly spaced. He measured them against his own hand. Whatever made these marks had limbs twice the size of his entire arm. He moved deeper into the facility. The main operations center was a disaster. Computer terminals were smashed, furniture overturned, and drag marks led away from every workstation. Long smears of various colors of blood painted the floor. The colony had housed 6 different species. None of them had survived. Daniel followed the drag marks to the ventilation system. The access panel had been torn off and the shaft beyond disappeared into darkness. He knelt beside it and activated his scanner, sending a pulse into the depths. The return signal showed the shaft branching into a maze of passages throughout the facility. Classic ambush predator behavior. Use the infrastructure to move unseen. Strike from unexpected angles, drag prey back to a central location for feeding. But something bothered him about the pattern. He moved to the security office and accessed the backup servers. Most of the data was corrupted, but he found 17 seconds of footage from the final attack. He watched it 3 times, his expression growing more grim with each viewing. The creature that flowed through the corridor was like liquid darkness. 12 feet of midnight black chitin, limbs that ended in blades and a head that was mostly eyes. Too many eyes. It moved along the ceiling like gravity was a suggestion, faster than the camera could properly track. A Vorian miner tried to fight it. She was armed and trained, her species' natural combat instincts on full display. The creature took her apart in 4 seconds, efficient, practiced, bored. Daniel stopped the playback and sat back. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. He knew what he was looking at. The classified files hadn't been wrong. Void Stalker. He had never actually seen one before. Nobody in his unit had. They were creatures from horror stories. Predators from the dark age of galactic expansion when the Coalition pushed too far into dead space. The species that encountered them learned quickly to abandon those regions entirely. Void Stalkers were supposed to be extinct, trapped in sectors that had been quarantined for 300 years. Someone had brought one here. The question was why. Daniel stood and began setting up his equipment in the operations center. He didn't try to hide or fortify his position. Instead, he made noise. He activated terminals, turned on lights, and generally announced his presence to anything paying attention in the facility. He laid out his tools in a specific pattern around the room. Magnetic clamps attached to structural points, pressure sensors under panels, cryo canisters rigged to emergency releases. To an alien observer, it would look random, but Daniel had learned trap making from people who made it an art form. Then he sat in the center of the room and waited. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Daniel remained still, controlling his breathing, listening to every sound in the facility. The hum of life support, the creak of metal adjusting to temperature changes, the whisper of air through damaged vents. There, a sound that didn't belong, metal scraping against metal, so quiet that most species would miss it. Daniel didn't move, didn't react. He just sat there appearing vulnerable and unaware. The Void Stalker took another 10 minutes to position itself. Daniel tracked its movement by sound alone, building a mental map of its approach. It was coming through the ventilation shaft above and behind him. The same route it had used to ambush the miners. Predictable. Predators were creatures of habit, even the intelligent ones. The attack came without warning. The vent cover exploded outward and the Void Stalker dropped like a shadow. Blade limbs extended, all those eyes focused on its prey. Daniel triggered the first trap. Magnetic nets deployed from the ceiling, high-tensile cables designed to restrain industrial equipment. They wrapped around the creature mid-fall, throwing off its attack. It hit the floor off balance and turned its attention to the nets, slicing through them with its blade limbs. By the time it freed itself, Daniel was already moving. He ran through the door he had left open, heading deeper into the facility. Behind him, he heard the creature recover and give chase. Its limbs clicked against the floor with a sound like knives on glass. Daniel led it through corridors he had mapped earlier. At the first intersection, he triggered a pressure sensor that released a cryo canister. Supercooled gas filled the corridor. The Void Stalker slowed but didn't stop. Its species were adapted to the cold of deep space. But it was irritated now. He could tell by the way it moved, more aggressive and less cautious. Good. Angry predators made mistakes. He led it through 2 more trap zones, each one doing minor damage, but failing to stop it. The creature was learning his patterns now, avoiding obvious triggers and adjusting its approach. It was smart. That made it dangerous, but it also made it arrogant. Daniel reached the final chamber, a large storage bay that had once held mining equipment. Now it held only the trap he had spent an hour rigging. A cryopod, the kind used to preserve food for long-term storage. modified with cooling systems from 3 different machines. It was crude and unstable, but it would work once. The Void Stalker burst into the chamber, moving faster than before. It had figured out that Daniel was leading it somewhere and decided to end the game. Its blade limbs extended, all those eyes locked on the human running toward the far wall. Daniel dropped and rolled at the last second. The Void Stalker flew over him and hit the cryopod's activation zone. Daniel triggered the system remotely. Every cooling unit in the room activated simultaneously, dumping their entire charge into the confined space. The temperature dropped 200 degrees in 3 seconds. Ice crystals formed on every surface. The Void Stalker, caught in the center of the effect, tried to escape, but its limbs were already stiffening from the intense cold. It managed one more step before the emergency cryogel deployed, engulfing it in a foam that hardened on contact. Daniel stood slowly, his breath misting in the frigid air. The Void Stalker was frozen mid-lunge, its blade limbs extended, its eyes still showing awareness. It wasn't dead. The trap had been designed to capture, not kill. He approached carefully and examined the creature through the ice. This close, he could see details that the security footage had missed. Old scars on its carapace, places where its natural armor had been damaged and healed, and something else, something that made his blood run cold. A metallic implant embedded in the creature's neural cluster, technology that didn't match anything the Void Stalker species should have access to. Someone had put that there. Someone had controlled this creature. Daniel activated his communicator, linking back to Harmony 7. It took a moment for the signal to connect across the distance. Harmony 7. This is Reed, I'm at asteroid K449. There was silence on the other end, then Trowell's voice, clipped and angry. Reed, you left the station without authorization. Return immediately or face. I'm coming back, Daniel interrupted. And I'm bringing your problem with me. Tell the security team to prepare a containment area in Bay 7. High security protocols. Nothing gets in or out. What are you talking about? What problem? Daniel looked at the frozen Void Stalker, at its countless eyes still watching him through the ice. The thing that destroyed your mining colonies. I caught it, more silence. Then Lissa's voice, sharp and disbelieving. You caught the predator. By yourself? Yes, impossible. What kind of creature could destroy 3 military installations? Daniel pulled himself away from the cryopod and headed back to his shuttle. His body was starting to feel the exhaustion now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving behind the reality of what he had just done. He had been awake for 38 hours. His hands were shaking. It's called a Void Stalker, he said, and I need you to believe me when I tell you this. The creature isn't your biggest problem. Someone released it deliberately. Someone is using it as a weapon. This isn't over. He cut the connection before they could respond and began the process of loading the frozen creature into his shuttle's cargo bay. It took all his remaining strength to operate the facility's loading equipment. By the time he finished and launched back toward Harmony 7, he could barely keep his eyes open. But sleep would have to wait. The creature in his cargo hold was just the beginning of this mystery. And Daniel had a feeling that when the people behind it learned what he had done, they would be very interested in meeting him. The galaxy thought humans were weak because they had no natural weapons or armor, but humans had survived on Earth by being smarter than the things that hunted them. They learned to turn every disadvantage into strategy. Daniel Reed was about to teach the Galactic Coalition that lesson. Whether they wanted to learn it or not, the docking bay of Harmony 7 had never been so crowded. Word spread fast on a station with 40,000 inhabitants representing 30 different species. A human had left without permission, hunted alone, and was now returning with something in his cargo hold, something dangerous. Trowell stood at the front of the security team, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Beside him, Grant shifted his massive weight from foot to foot, his forearms crossed in a posture that suggested both skepticism and unease. Lissa waited with reptilian stillness, her eyes fixed on the docking portal. Behind them, a crowd of curious aliens pressed against the safety barriers. Hectarians, Vorians, Bulwarks, and a dozen other species, all waiting to see what the weak little human had brought back. Daniel's shuttle entered the bay on minimal thrust, its movements precise despite the pilot's exhaustion. It settled onto the landing pad with barely a sound. For a long moment, nothing happened. The crowd waited, tension building with each silent second. Then the cargo bay doors began to open. The hover lift emerged slowly, its platform bearing something massive wrapped in cryofoam and emergency containment sheets. Ice crystals still clung to the surface, and beneath them a shape could be seen. Something long and angular with too many limbs and an unmistakable predatory silhouette. Daniel appeared from the pilot's hatch, climbing down with movements that spoke of bone-deep weariness. His maintenance uniform was torn in places, stained with coolant and something darker. He had a cut above his left eye and his hands trembled slightly as he activated the hoverlift controls. The platform moved forward, bringing its cargo fully into the bay's light. Daniel pulled away a section of the containment sheet, revealing what lay beneath. The silence that followed was absolute. The Voidstalker was frozen in mid-lunge, its blade limbs extended forward as if still trying to reach its prey. Its body was 12 feet of midnight black chitin, segmented and armored. Its head was a nightmare, of eyes, at least 20 of them arranged in clusters, each one reflecting the bay lights like dark mirrors. Even frozen and contained, it radiated menace. Grant took a step backward. His species were warriors, born fighters who prided themselves on courage. But even bulwarks had legends about Voidstalkers. Every civilization that pushed into the dead sectors had learned to fear these creatures. Lysa hissed, a long sound that her translator didn't bother to interpret. Her reptilian eyes were wide, her body locked in a defensive posture that was pure instinct. Trowel approached slowly, his 8-foot frame somehow seeming smaller next to the frozen predator. "This is impossible," he said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "Voidstalkers are extinct. They've been extinct for 3 centuries. "Not extinct," Daniel said. His voice was rough from exhaustion. "Just hidden. Someone kept this one alive and trained it. Or bred it. I found control implants in its neural cluster." "You captured it alone?" Lysa asked. She couldn't seem to take her eyes off the creature. "How?" Daniel swayed slightly on his feet. The bay lights seemed too bright, the noise of the crowd too loud. He reached out to steady himself against the hoverlift. "Can we do this somewhere other than here? I've been awake for 38 hours and I need to sit down." Trowel's mandibles clicked in what might have been concern. He gestured to the medical team waiting at the edge of the bay. "Get him to medical." "No," Daniel said, pulling away from the approaching medics. "Brief first, medical after. This is too important." "You can barely stand," Lysa observed. "I'll stand long enough. Trowel, get this thing into secure containment." "Maximum protocols. I disabled its voluntary functions, but it's not dead. When it thaws, it'll be angry and looking for a way out." Grant found his voice. "You want us to keep it alive?" "It's evidence. Someone weaponized this creature. Someone is using Voidstalkers to cover up other activities. The mining colonies weren't random attacks. They were targeted strikes on specific locations. This is bigger than one predator." The crowd behind the barriers erupted in conversation. Aliens turned to each other, their various languages creating a cacophony of sound. The idea that someone was deliberately using Voidstalkers as weapons was almost more frightening than the creature itself. Trowel organized his security team to transport the frozen Voidstalker to the high-security containment area. It took 8 aliens working together to move it, and even then they handled it with obvious fear. Daniel watched them go, his mind already working through the implications of what he had found. An hour later, he sat in the station commander's office with Trowel, Grant, and Lysa. Medical staff had treated his injuries over his protests, sealing the cut above his eye and injecting him with stimulants to keep him functional a little longer. He felt wired and exhausted at the same time, his thoughts sharp but his body screaming for rest. "Explain," Grant said. The station administrator was used to dealing with trade disputes and diplomatic incidents, not apex predators and military operations. "How did you, a human, capture something that killed dozens of trained warriors?" Daniel took a long drink from the water container they had given him. "Because I didn't try to fight it fair. Your warriors went after it with strength and natural advantages. They tried to overpower it. That's how your species survive. You're bigger, stronger, better armed than most threats you face. And humans aren't. Lisa said. It wasn't a question. Humans evolved on a world where we were prey as often as we were predators. We didn't have armor or venom or natural weapons. We survived by being smarter. We learned to track anything, to outlast anything, and to turn our environment into a weapon. Tral leaned forward. You're saying human weakness is actually an advantage? I'm saying that when you can't rely on strength, you learn to rely on strategy. I didn't overpower the Void Stalker. I led it into traps. I exploited its hunting patterns. I made it angry enough to make mistakes. Then I used equipment your species wouldn't think to use because it's designed for industrial purposes, not combat. Daniel pulled up a display on the office terminal, showing his recording from the mining colony. The creature hunts through ventilation systems, strikes from unexpected angles, and uses superior speed to end fights quickly. That works against most species because they expect combat to be direct. Face-to-face, test of strength. And you didn't give it that, Lysa said, understanding dawning in her eyes. I gave it a prey that ran, a prey that seemed helpless. I triggered every instinct it had, made it chase me through a killing field I had prepared. By the time it realized what was happening, it was already frozen. Grant shook his massive head. Your entire strategy was based on appearing weak. Yes. And you did this alone, without weapons or natural advantages. That's how humans hunt. We didn't have a choice. Earth's predators were bigger and faster than us. We learned to be more persistent and more clever instead. There was a long silence in the office. The three aliens looked at Daniel with expressions that might have been respect, or might have been unease. Your military records, Lisa said carefully. They're mostly classified. What we can access shows you as a maintenance technician before joining the coalition. But that's not the whole truth, is it? Daniel met her eyes. No. Who were you on Earth? He considered lying, considered deflecting. But they had earned the truth, and what was coming would require them to understand what humans were capable of. I was part of the reclamation forces. We were soldiers who operated in the parts of Earth too dangerous for civilian populations. After the ecological collapses and the wars, large areas of the planet became territory for megafauna, creatures that evolved or were engineered to survive in the new environment. Our job was to hunt them when they threatened human settlements. You hunted monsters, Tral said. We hunted things that hunted us. Yes. Lysa accessed a deeper level of the security database, using command codes that made Daniel's eyebrows rise. Whatever she found made her scales pale slightly. Your official record lists 47 confirmed kills. Operation Nightfall. What were you killing? Daniel's jaw tightened. Things that used to be human, mostly. And things that were never human at all. The details are classified for a reason. But you've hunted creatures like the Void Stalker before, Grant said. Nothing exactly like it, but similar principles apply. An apex predator is an apex predator. They all have patterns, they all have weaknesses. You just have to be smart enough to find them and patient enough to exploit them. Tral's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The coalition judged humans by physical standards. We saw your lack of natural weapons and assumed you were weak. We didn't consider that you might have developed other advantages. Most species don't. Your evolutionary paths were different. You became strong enough or fast enough or well-armed enough to dominate your environments. Humans became smart enough and stubborn enough to survive despite being weaker than most things we faced. Lisa closed the database and fixed Daniel with her cold reptilian stare. What do you need from us, X? Time to examine the Void Stalker properly. Access to your intelligence on the mining colony attacks. And you need to start considering that this isn't over. Someone is using these creatures as weapons. They picked targets carefully. There's a pattern here and we need to find it before they strike again. You want to continue this hunt, Grant said. I want to stop whoever is behind it. The Void Stalker is just a tool. The real threat is whoever put control implants in its brain and pointed it at coalition targets. Tral stood, his decision made. You'll have whatever resources you need. Full access to security records and intelligence reports. But Reed, you need to rest first. You're barely functional. Daniel wanted to argue, but his body chose that moment to remind him that he was running on stimulants and willpower. The room tilted slightly. Maybe a few hours. 12 hours minimum, Lissa said. And that's after medical clears you. You're no good to us if you collapse. They escorted him to medical, where doctors from 3 different species examined him with a thoroughness that suggested they were intensely curious about human physiology. Daniel endured it with patience he didn't feel, answering questions about his bone density, muscle structure, and recovery capacity. As he finally lay down in a medical pod, his body surrendering to exhaustion, he thought about the frozen void stalker in containment, about the control implants and the pattern of attacks. Someone out there was using Earth's philosophy against the galaxy. They had taken an apex predator and made it a weapon. They had turned strength into a tool, but they had made one mistake. They had assumed that being weak was the same as being helpless. Daniel closed his eyes and let sleep take him, already planning his next move. The hunt had only just begun. Daniel woke to the sound of his comm unit buzzing. For a moment he didn't remember where he was, his mind still caught in dreams of darkness and blade limbs. Then reality settled in. Medical bay. Harmony 7, the Void Stalker in containment. He checked his chronometer. 14 hours had passed. His body felt almost human again, though every muscle ached with a deep soreness that spoke of stress in combat. The comm buzzed again. He answered it. "Reed, this is Trell. We need you in the science bay. Now." Something in the security chief's voice made Daniel move faster than his body wanted to. He dressed quickly and headed through the station corridors. Aliens who had ignored him for months now stopped to stare as he passed. Word had spread. The weak human who had captured a Void Stalker alone was suddenly the most talked about being on the station. The science bay was crowded when he arrived. Lissa was there, along with Grant and a half-dozen alien scientists from various species. They all stood around a containment field where the Void Stalker remained frozen, though the ice had been partially melted to allow for examination. "What did you find?" Daniel asked. A Hectarian scientist gestured to a display screen showing detailed scans of the creature's internal structure. "The implant you mentioned. It's far more sophisticated than we initially thought. It's not just a control device. It's a complete neural override system." Daniel studied the scans. "Meaning?" "Meaning this creature wasn't just trained or directed. It was being remotely piloted. Someone could control its every action from a distance. Can you trace the control signal? It's encrypted and routed through multiple relay points. But we're working on it. There's something else, though." The scientist pulled up another image. "These scars on its carapace. They're old, years old, and they show evidence of deliberate wounds that were allowed to heal. Someone was testing it," Lissa said, seeing what it could survive. Daniel circled the containment field, examining the frozen predator from different angles. This close, he could see details he had missed before. Places where the chitin had been damaged and regrown. Evidence of healed injuries that should have been fatal. They were breeding these things, he said quietly, or at least keeping them alive long enough to study and weaponize them. "How many attacks did you say there were?" "4 confirmed," Trowell replied. 3 mining colonies and 1 research station. All in the past 6 weeks. And all had survivors report the same type of predator? "No survivors," Trell corrected. "These are the first solid images we have of what attacked them. Your footage from the mining colony and this specimen." Daniel turned to face them. "Then how do you know there were 4 attacks by the same creature? If there were no survivors and no footage, what connected them?" The silence that followed was heavy. Grant spoke first. "The pattern of destruction, the speed of the attacks, the fact that entire facilities went dark without sending distress signals. That's not evidence of the same predator," Daniel said. "That's evidence of similar methods. What if it wasn't one Void Stalker? What if there are multiple creatures?" The scientists exchanged glances. One of them, a Vorian with pale scales, pulled up a star map. The attacks were spread across a wide area, hundreds of light years apart. For a single creature to cover that distance between attacks would require faster-than-light travel, which Void Stalkers can't do on their own. Lissa finished. Someone would have to transport them. Someone with ships and resources. Daniel studied the star map. The 4 attack sites formed a pattern, a rough line that pointed toward something. He traced it with his finger across the display. "What's at the end of this trajectory?" Trell enlarged the map. At the far end of the line of attacks was a massive station, larger than anything else in the sector. Station Prosperity. It's our primary fuel depot for this entire region. How many people? 12,000 permanent residents. Another 3,000 transient workers and traders at any given time. And if it went offline, Grant's expression darkened. Half the sector would lose fuel access within a week. Ships would be stranded. Trade routes would collapse. It would be chaos. Daniel looked at the frozen void stalker. The mining colonies weren't the target. They were tests. Proofs of concept. Someone is working up to a larger attack. Station Prosperity, Lissa said. But why? What would anyone gain from destroying a fuel depot? You're thinking too small. They don't want to destroy it. They want to capture it. Use the void stalkers to kill the security forces and clear the station. Then move in and take control of the most valuable fuel supply in the sector. Trowell's mandibles clicked rapidly. That's an act of war. It's an act of piracy on a scale that looks like war, Daniel corrected. Whoever is behind this isn't a government. They're too careful, too methodical. This is a criminal organization with serious resources. The Vorian scientists pulled up data on the control implant. If we're right about multiple creatures, then someone has been breeding or collecting void stalkers for years. The resources required would be enormous. Ships, facilities, trained personnel who could handle these predators without being killed. And the technical expertise to create neural override systems that work on one of the most dangerous species ever encountered, another scientist added. Daniel walked back to the star map and studied the timeline of attacks. When is the next supply shipment due at Station Prosperity? Grant checked his terminal. 4 days. It's a major delivery. 3 massive freighters carrying fuel and supplies for the next month. That's when they'll hit it. Maximum chaos, maximum value. The station will be busy with docking procedures and cargo transfers. Security will be spread thin. We should send a warning, Trowell said. Evacuate the station. If we do that, whoever is behind this will know we're onto them. They'll disappear and we'll never find them. They'll just try again somewhere else with a different target. Lysa's eyes narrowed. You want to use the station as bait. I want to stop them. And yes, that means letting them think their plan is working right up until we spring the trap. You're talking about putting 15,000 lives at risk, Grant said. I'm talking about ending this threat permanently instead of just postponing it. If we scare them off, they'll adapt and come back. If we catch them in the act, we can trace them back to their source and shut down the entire operation. Trowell considered this. You're suggesting we let them attack Station Prosperity. I'm suggesting I go to Station Prosperity and prepare for their attack. When they come, I'll be ready. And hopefully, so will your security forces. 1 human against multiple void stalkers, Lissa said. You barely survived one. I survived one because I was alone and had to improvise. Give me 4 days to prepare and a proper facility to work with, and I can handle more than one. The question is whether the coalition is willing to trust a human with this. The room was quiet. Daniel could feel the weight of their stares, the calculations happening behind alien eyes. They were judging him by human standards now instead of by their own standards. That was progress. Grant made the decision. You'll have whatever resources you need. But you don't go alone. Trowell will assign a security team to work with you. Security teams are targets. The Void Stalkers will go after armed groups first. I need to be the prey again. That means appearing vulnerable. Unacceptable, Trowell said. I won't send you to your death. Daniel smiled, though there was no humor in it. You're not sending me anywhere. I'm volunteering. And I'm not going to die. I'm going to prove that the weak species can do what all your warriors couldn't. He pulled up the station schematics for Prosperity on the display. I'll need access to these layouts. Complete environmental controls, industrial equipment that can be repurposed, and 3 days of uninterrupted preparation time. And if you're wrong, Lissa asked, if they don't attack Prosperity, then I'll have wasted 3 days and made myself look foolish. But I'm not wrong. This is what humans do. We see patterns. We predict behavior. We hunt by understanding our prey better than they understand themselves. He pointed at the frozen void stalker. These creatures are apex predators, but they're still just animals following instinct and training. The people controlling them are the real threat. And people, no matter what species they are, follow predictable patterns when they think they're smarter than everyone else. Trowell exchanged looks with Grant and Lysa. Some decision passed between them silently. You'll leave in 6 hours, Trowell said. I'm assigning Lissa to accompany you. Non-negotiable. You'll have full access to Station Prosperity's systems, but the station administrator must be informed of the threat. Agreed. But the general population can't know. If word spreads, whoever is watching will abort the operation. Understood. Daniel nodded and turned back to study the star map. 6 hours to prepare, 4 days to turn a fuel depot into a trap, and then he would face whatever came through the darkness wearing the shape of humanity's oldest nightmares. Behind him, the scientists returned to examining the Void Stalker. They were learning its biology, its structure, its weaknesses. That was good. Daniel would need every advantage he could find, because somewhere out in the galaxy, someone was preparing to unleash multiple Void Stalkers on an unsuspecting station. They thought they had planned for every variable. They hadn't planned for humans, and that, Daniel thought, was going to be their fatal mistake. Station Prosperity hung in space like a metal flower, its 8 arms extending from a central hub to create docking points for the massive fuel freighters that kept the sector running. Each arm was large enough to house thousands of workers, and the central hub contained processing facilities that refined raw materials into usable fuel for dozens of different ship types. Daniel stood in the observation deck of the central hub, watching the second freighter complete its docking procedure. Beside him, Lissa monitored her data pad, tracking the movements of every ship in the vicinity. 2 more freighters arrive in 17 hours, she said. That's when you think they'll attack. Maximum confusion. Multiple ships connected to the station. Fuel transfers in progress. It's when security will be most distracted and when success will yield the biggest payoff. Daniel pointed to different sections of the station. I've rigged sections 4 through 9 with environmental controls. Temperature, pressure, gravity, all can be adjusted independently. The station administrator wasn't happy about that. Lisa noted. Pell will be even less happy if Void Stalkers tear through his station without any countermeasures. This is the only way. Over the past 3 days, Daniel had worked almost without sleep. He had mapped every corridor, every maintenance tunnel, every ventilation shaft in the station. He knew the facility better than most people who had lived here for years, and he had turned it into something between a maze and a weapon. Magnetic clamps in strategic locations, pressure sensors under floor panels, coolant systems modified to deploy on command, mining charges placed at structural weak points. Nothing that would harm the station itself, but everything that would make it a killing field for creatures that relied on speed and ambush tactics. You really think they'll send more than one? Lissa said. It wasn't quite a question. The mining colonies were killed by single creatures. This is a bigger target with more security. They'll send at least 3, maybe more, enough to overwhelm conventional defenses quickly. And you're going to face them alone. Daniel turned to look at her. I asked you to stay in the safe zone. You asked. I refused. My people are warriors, Reed. We don't hide while others fight. Your people are warriors who fight with honor and strength. That's not how this works. If you stay with me, you have to be willing to run, to hide, to look weak. Can you do that? Lissa's scales rippled with something that might have been irritation. I can adapt. We'll see. An alert chimed on Lissa's datapad. She checked it and her expression changed. We have a problem. One of the dock workers, a Hectarian named Voss, just sent an encrypted message on an unauthorized channel. Daniel was already moving toward the door. Where is he now? Section 6, near the external maintenance bay. They ran through corridors that Daniel had memorized, taking turns that would intercept Voss before he could reach more populated areas. Daniel's hand went to the small weapon at his belt, a human-designed tool that most aliens would dismiss as inadequate. They found Voss in a maintenance corridor, trying to access an external comm panel. He was alone, his attention focused on his work. He didn't notice them until Daniel spoke. Voss, step away from the panel. The Hectarian spun, his mandibles clicking in surprise. For a moment he looked like he might comply. Then his posture changed, his armored body shifting into a combat stance that was far too practiced for a dock worker. You're the human from Harmony 7, Voss said, the one who captured the stalker. That's right. Who are you working for? Voss laughed, a clicking sound that his translator rendered as cruel amusement. You think you're clever. You think you've figured it all out, but you're just one weak human. What can you possibly do against what's coming? He attacked without further warning, moving with speed that would have surprised anyone who didn't know that Hectarians could strike like insects when motivated. But Daniel had fought in the reclamation zones. He had faced things faster and more dangerous than an armored alien. He sidestepped the first strike, a blade limb slash that would have gutted him. His counter was precise, a strike to the joint where Voss's armor was thinnest. The Hectarian stumbled but recovered quickly, pressing the attack with trained aggression. Lissa moved to flank him, but Daniel called out, "No, he's mine." She hesitated, her warrior instincts warring with the order, but she held back, watching as the human and the Hectarian fought in the narrow corridor. Voss was stronger, better armored, and had natural weapons. By every physical measure, he should have dominated the fight. But Daniel fought like something Voss had never encountered. He targeted joints and sensory organs. He used the corridor's dimensions to limit Voss's movements. He turned every advantage the Hectarian had into a disadvantage. When Voss lunged forward, Daniel dropped and swept his legs. When Voss tried to use his mandibles, Daniel jammed a pressure point that locked the Hectarian's jaw. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't honorable. It was effective. In less than 2 minutes, Voss was on the ground, his limbs restrained with magnetic cuffs that Daniel had carried specifically for this possibility. "Who are you working for?" Daniel asked again, breathing hard but steady. Voss's eyes showed something like fear now. "The Black Shroud. They're mercenaries, the best in the sector. Why target this station? Control the fuel, control the sector. They've been planning this for years. Breeding the stalkers, testing them, perfecting the control systems. How many are coming?" Voss smiled, showing teeth. 3. More than enough to kill everyone here. More than enough to kill you. You might have caught one by surprise, but you can't fight 3 at once. Nobody can. Daniel pulled Voss to his feet and handed him to Lissa. "Get him to security containment. Then get yourself to the safe zone. I told you, this isn't a debate. If I'm right, we have less than 12 hours before they attack. I need to finish preparations, and I need to know you're not going to get killed trying to help me. Your people are warriors. Mine are survivors. Let me do what I'm designed for." Lissa looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Daniel's expression made her nod. She took Voss and headed toward the security center, leaving Daniel alone in the corridor. He checked his chronometer. 11 hours until the freighters completed docking. 11 hours to finish his trap and prepare for what was coming. He moved through the station, checking each modification he had made, testing each trigger, ensuring that every piece of his plan was ready. The station workers he passed didn't know what he was preparing for. They saw a human moving through their corridors with purpose, and they gave him space. Word had spread about what happened on Harmony 7, about the human who hunted a void stalker alone. Some of the aliens looked at him with respect now, others with fear. Daniel didn't care about either reaction. He just needed them to stay out of his way. In Section 7, he found Pell, the station administrator. The nervous Vorian was reviewing evacuation plans for the 3rd time. "You're certain they're coming," Pell said. "Yes. And you're certain you can stop them?" Daniel met his eyes. "No, but I can try. And trying is better than running. Your species has a strange definition of bravery. We call it stubbornness. There's a difference, but it's subtle." Pell's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. "The Coalition judged your species poorly. The Coalition judged us by their own standards. That was the mistake." Daniel left Pell to his preparations and continued his rounds. In Section 9, he made the final adjustments to the coolant system. In Section 5, he tested the magnetic clamps one last time. In Section 4, he set the mining charges to remote detonation. Everything was ready. He returned to the central observation deck and sat in the darkness, watching the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, ships were approaching. Ships carrying creatures that had been nightmares for 300 years. Ships operated by people who thought they had planned for every variable. Daniel closed his eyes and went through the plan one more time in his mind. He visualized each section of the station, each trap, each possible approach the Void Stalkers might take. He had learned this technique in the reclamation zones from an old soldier who had survived 20 years in territories where humans were prey. "Know the ground better than your enemy knows it," the soldier had said. "Turn the environment into your ally. And never ever fight fair when fighting smart is an option." Daniel opened his eyes. On the viewport, he could see the distant lights of approaching ships. They were still hours away, but they were coming. The galaxy had called humans weak because they lacked natural weapons and armor. But weakness was relative. And sometimes being underestimated was the most dangerous weapon of all. He stood and activated his comm unit, opening a channel to Lissa in the security center. "It's time," he said. "Seal the security center and don't come out no matter what you hear. This is going to get messy. Reed, trust me. If I'm still alive in 6 hours, you'll know the plan worked. If I'm not, evacuate the station and warn the coalition that the Black Shroud has more stalkers. Either way, this ends tonight." He cut the connection before she could respond and walked toward Section 4, where his trap began. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. His body was ready. 3 Void Stalkers were coming. 3 apex predators that had killed hundreds of warriors from a dozen different species, against 1 human who refused to be prey. Daniel reached the center of Section 4 and sat down on the floor, making himself visible and vulnerable. Then he waited for the monsters to arrive, and when they did, they would learn what humanity had known for millions of years. The hunter that underestimates its prey dies hungry. The attack came during the 3rd freighter's docking sequence, exactly as Daniel had predicted. 3 points of entry, simultaneous breaches in Sections 2, 6, and 8. The Void Stalkers entered through external maintenance, ports that should have been sealed but had been compromised by Black Shroud operatives weeks earlier. Daniel watched them on his security monitors from his position in Section 4. 3 massive shadows flowing through the corridors like liquid darkness. They moved with coordinated precision that spoke of neural synchronization. Someone was controlling all 3 from a remote location, turning them into a single multi-bodied weapon. The station alarms screamed. Workers ran toward emergency shelters. Security teams mobilized, but they were following the evacuation protocols Daniel had insisted on. Get the civilians to safety, then seal the blast doors. Leave the Void Stalkers to the human. The first stalker reached Section 3. It moved along the ceiling, its many eyes scanning for targets. It found none. The corridors were empty, the workers already evacuated. This seemed to confuse it. The creature paused, its head swiveling as it searched for prey. Daniel triggered the first modification. The temperature in Section 3 dropped 40 degrees in 10 seconds. The Void Stalker slowed but didn't stop. Cold alone wouldn't be enough, but it would make the creature more cautious. The 2nd and 3rd stalkers converged on Section 5, moving as a coordinated pair. They had learned from the captured specimen. They wouldn't separate easily. That was fine. Daniel had prepared for that possibility too. He activated the magnetic field generators in Section 5. The stalkers relied on electromagnetic sensing to coordinate in darkness. The sudden interference disrupted their movement, causing them to collide with each other. They recovered quickly, but those few seconds of confusion gave Daniel the opening he needed. He left his position in Section 4 and ran toward Section 5, making noise, making himself visible on every sensor. The stalkers detected him immediately. Their programming shifted. Target acquired. Hunt mode engaged. They came after him with terrifying speed. Daniel ran through corridors he had memorized, his feet hitting marks he had placed days earlier. Behind him, he could hear the clicking of blade limbs on metal, the whisper of chitin sliding against walls as they flowed through the station like nightmares given form. He reached the junction between Sections 5 and 6 and triggered the first trap. Mining charges detonated on structural supports, causing a controlled collapse that sealed the corridor behind him. It wouldn't stop the stalkers, but it would force them to find another route. Buy him seconds. In a hunt, seconds were everything. The 3rd stalker, the one that had been in Section 3, found an alternate route and cut him off in Section 6. It dropped from a ventilation shaft directly in his path, its blade limbs extended. All those eyes focused on him with predatory certainty. Daniel didn't try to fight it. He dove to the side and triggered the floor panels. Magnetic clamps engaged, grabbing the stalker's limbs and holding them for a fraction of a second. The creature tore free almost immediately, but that moment was enough. Daniel was already moving, running deeper into Section 6 where he had prepared something special. The stalker followed, joined now by the other 2 who had found their way around the collapsed corridor. All 3 converged on their prey, moving faster now, certain of their kill. The fuel processing center in Section 6 was a massive chamber filled with pipes, tanks, and machinery. Daniel ran into the center of it and stopped, turning to face the creatures pursuing him. They entered from 3 different points, surrounding him perfectly. Coordinated, efficient. Lethal. He triggered the pressure system he had modified. Supercooled coolant vented from every pipe simultaneously, filling the chamber with freezing mist. The temperature dropped 100 degrees in 5 seconds. The stalkers slowed, their movements becoming sluggish as their bodies struggled to maintain function in the extreme cold. But they didn't stop. They were bred for space, designed to survive in conditions that would kill most organic life. The cold hindered them but didn't disable them. That was fine. The cold wasn't meant to stop them. It was meant to make them angry. Angry predators made mistakes. The closest stalker lunged forward, its blade limbs sweeping through the space where Daniel had been standing. But he was already gone, rolling under the machinery using the industrial equipment as cover. The stalker's attack struck a coolant tank instead, puncturing it and releasing more freezing vapor. The other 2 stalkers adjusted their approach, trying to anticipate his movements. But they were thinking like predators, expecting prey to run in panic. Daniel wasn't running in panic. He was leading them through a carefully choreographed dance. He emerged on the far side of the chamber and triggered the next modification. Artificial gravity in the chamber shifted, going from standard to heavy. The stalkers, adapted for zero-gravity environments, suddenly weighed 3 times what they expected. Their movements became clumsy, their coordination disrupted. Daniel used their confusion to separate them. He targeted the closest one, the stalker that had attacked first. It was the most aggressive, which made it the most predictable. He led it toward the center of the chamber where he had positioned the fuel processing equipment in a specific configuration. The stalker followed, no longer cautious, angry now at this prey that refused to die. It lunged forward with its full speed, blade limbs extended for a killing strike. Daniel dropped flat. The stalker flew over him and crashed into the processing equipment. Its momentum carried it into the magnetic containment field Daniel had rigged from 3 different industrial systems. The field engaged, pinning the creature against the machinery. It wasn't strong enough to hold the stalker for long, but it held it long enough. Daniel triggered the coolant release he had prepared specifically for this moment. Liquid nitrogen, normally used to supercool fuel samples, flooded the containment area. The stalker froze solid in less than 3 seconds, its blade limbs still extended in attack position. 1 down. 2 to go. The remaining stalkers learned from their companion's fate. They became more cautious, coordinating their attacks more carefully. They tried to pin Daniel between them, using their superior speed and numbers to overwhelm him. Daniel led them out of the fuel processing center and into Section 7. This area was smaller, with narrower corridors that limited their movement options. He had spent an entire day preparing this section specifically for close-quarters combat. The stalkers followed him into the narrow passages, their massive bodies barely fitting through the corridors. Daniel triggered pressure sensors that deployed nets of high-tensile cable from the walls. The nets wrapped around the creatures, tangling their limbs and slowing their pursuit. They tore through the nets, but each one bought Daniel precious seconds. He used those seconds to reach the maintenance hub at the center of Section 7. It was a cramped space filled with access panels, conduits, and control systems. Terrible ground for creatures that relied on speed and room to maneuver. Perfect ground for a human who had learned to fight in confined spaces. The first stalker entered the hub and immediately lost its advantage. Its large body couldn't move freely in the cramped environment. Its blade limbs struck walls and equipment instead of its prey. For the first time in the fight, Daniel had the superior position. He used it ruthlessly. He targeted the creature's joints with a plasma cutter he had appropriated from the maintenance supplies. The tool wasn't designed as a weapon, but in the right hands it could cut through chitin as easily as metal. The stalker tried to adapt, tried to use its superior strength to tear through the equipment and reach him, but every move it made exposed another vulnerable joint, another sensory organ, another weak point that millions of years of evolution had hidden, but that human pattern recognition had learned to find. The fight lasted 4 minutes. To Daniel, it felt like hours. Every second was a calculation, every movement a decision that meant life or death. The stalker was faster and stronger, but Daniel knew the space better. He had prepared the ground. He had turned the environment into his weapon. When it was over, the stalker lay on the floor of the maintenance hub, its neural cluster destroyed by a precise strike with the plasma cutter. It wasn't frozen like the first one. It was dead, 2 down. 1 to go. The final stalker didn't enter the maintenance hub. It had learned. Instead, it waited outside, patient now, understanding that it needed to change tactics. The neural link between the creatures had given it all the information from its fallen companions. It knew how the human fought. It knew his tricks. Daniel emerged from the maintenance hub slowly, his body screaming exhaustion, his hands shaking from adrenaline. The stalker waited in the corridor, motionless, all its eyes focused on him. For a long moment they watched each other. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, neither sure anymore which was which. Then the stalker attacked with everything it had. No coordination with dead companions. No caution. Just pure predatory speed and violence. Daniel didn't run. He stood his ground and triggered the final trap. Every modification he had made to sections 4 through 9 activated simultaneously. Temperature extremes, gravity shifts, magnetic fields, pressure changes. The entire station section became a chaotic environment that shifted every 2 seconds. The stalker's coordination failed. Its electromagnetic senses were overwhelmed. Its body struggled to adapt to the constantly changing conditions. It became disoriented, confused, vulnerable. Daniel moved through the chaos with practiced precision. He had spent 3 days memorizing every trigger, every change, every shift in the environment. He knew what would happen and when. The stalker was reacting. Daniel was anticipating. He led it to Section 9, to the central hub where he had prepared his final trap. The observation deck where he had started this hunt hours earlier. The viewport showed the stars beyond, beautiful and cold and infinite. The stalker followed him onto the deck, its movements now erratic, its control system failing as interference overwhelmed the remote pilot trying to coordinate it. For the first time, the creature was acting on instinct alone. Daniel faced it in the center of the observation deck. No more traps, no more tricks, just a human and a void stalker in direct confrontation. They fought for 7 minutes. The stalker was stronger, faster, better armed. Daniel was exhausted, injured, running on determination alone. But he had one advantage that the creature couldn't match. He refused to quit. Every time the stalker thought it had won, Daniel found another reserve of strength. Every time it thought it had landed a killing blow, Daniel turned it into a grazing strike. He fought with every technique he had learned in the reclamation zones, every trick that had kept him alive on a world where humans were prey as often as predators. The final strike was almost anticlimactic. The stalker overextended on a lunge, its exhaustion finally showing. Daniel stepped inside its reach and drove his knife into the neural cluster that Lisa's research had identified as the weak point. The blade was human-made, designed for combat in environments where plasma cutters wouldn't work. It was enough. The void stalker collapsed, its systems shutting down, its many eyes going dark one by one. Daniel stood over it, breathing hard, blood running from a dozen cuts, his body trembling with exhaustion. Then he collapsed, his legs finally giving out. He sat with his back against the viewport, staring at the 3 dead void stalkers scattered across the station sections. 3 apex predators, 3 creatures that had killed hundreds of warriors from species far stronger than humans, all dead because one human refused to be prey. His comm unit buzzed. Lisa's voice came through, tight with emotion. "Reed, are you alive?" "Yes." "The stalkers?" "Dead or captured. All 3 neutralized." There was a long silence. "Security teams are sweeping the station. We found the Black Shroud ship trying to retreat. Traal's forces have them contained. It's over. Good. You did it. You actually did it." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the viewport. "I did what humans do. I survived. The medical teams found him 20 minutes later. They treated his injuries with a thoroughness that suggested they were still intensely curious about human biology. Daniel endured it patiently, answering their questions, allowing them to scan and measure and study. Over the next 3 days, the full picture emerged. The Black Shroud had been breeding void stalkers in a hidden facility in the dead sectors. They had planned to use them to seize control of critical infrastructure throughout the coalition. Station Prosperity was meant to be their first major success, proof of concept for a much larger operation. Daniel's actions had ended that plan permanently. Coalition forces raided the Black Shroud facility and recovered 12 more void stalkers, all destroyed or captured. The organization itself was dismantled, its leaders arrested, its resources seized. Grant came to see Daniel in medical. The massive bulwark stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, his forearms clasped in a gesture that suggested respect. "The Coalition owes you a debt," Grant said formally. "Your actions saved not just this station, but potentially dozens of others. I did my job. You did more than your job. You proved something that the galaxy needed to learn. That strength comes in many forms. That being physically weak doesn't mean being helpless, or is that the official statement?" Grant smiled, an expression that looked strange on his massive features. "The official statement is more diplomatic. But that's what it means. The Coalition judged your species poorly. We saw your lack of natural weapons and assumed you were inferior. We didn't consider what advantages you might have developed instead. And now we're reassessing everything we thought we knew about strength and weakness, about what it means to be a warrior species." Grant paused. "There's a position available. Special consultant to Coalition security. You would work with Trow to develop new training protocols, teach other species to think the way humans think, to fight the way you fight." Daniel shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but no. I'm a maintenance worker. That's enough for me. After everything you've done, you want to go back to fixing pipes? I saw enough monsters in the reclamation zones. I left that life because I wanted to fix things instead of break them. This was necessary, but it's not who I want to be." Grant studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand. The offer remains open if you change your mind." Lisa came last. She sat beside his bed and looked at him with her cold reptilian eyes. "I've been reviewing the security footage, watching how you fought. It was nothing like how Vorians fight. I know. You ran when you could have stood your ground. You used tricks instead of facing them directly. You turned your environment into a weapon instead of relying on your own strength. That's how humans survived on Earth. It's brilliant. Cowardly by our standards, but brilliant." Daniel laughed, though it hurt his injured ribs. "We never had the luxury of fighting with honor. We had to fight smart or die. That's not cowardice. That's adaptation. I'm beginning to understand the difference." Lisa stood to leave, then paused. "The station workers have been asking about you. They want to thank the human who saved them, but I told them you needed rest. Was that correct?" "Yes, thank you." "Reed, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you miss it? The hunt, the danger, the feeling of facing something stronger than you and winning anyway." Daniel thought about it carefully. "Sometimes, but I miss having a quiet life more. The hunt is exciting, but it's also exhausting. And every time you win, you know there will be another fight eventually. Another monster. Another threat. I wanted off that cycle. And yet you volunteered to come here, to face the stalkers alone, because it was necessary. Because people would die if I didn't. That's different than seeking out danger for its own sake." Lisa nodded slowly. "Your species is very strange, we know.